Welcome back to the archives. This is round 1 of the Evangel October Open. In this first round, I had the black pieces against a local player, a young up-and-coming player who's gained a lot of rating already just in the past year. And I had played them once a few months ago, and it was a draw. I had the black side of a Najdorf Sicilian. So I decided to play something a little bit different in this game, and I went with e6. Playing a French, which I commonly do play, but I wanted to just switch it up a little bit. The line he played in the Najdorf was not bad, but wasn't super main line, and I didn't put specific work into it, so I didn't think there was any reason to play into that again and give him a position that he was more comfortable with. So he played the advance, and we get a pretty standard position here. My opponent played b3 after some thought. So this told me that they were not super familiar with these types of positions. b3 is not typically a strong move here. Other moves like a3 is always a sign that white knows what they're doing. The bishop getting developed to e2 or d3. Those are the most common moves. But b3, not super common, not super good. So I went ahead and captured on d4 right away. My opponent retook with the knight. And here black has a couple of choices. One is to capture the pawn on e5. Say, I'm going to grab this pawn and we're going to go from there. I thought the position looked perfectly fine for black. Maybe slightly messy in some lines. Maybe they get to develop with tempo. But I wasn't terribly worried about it. But I also saw that if I captured with the knight, they were either going to have to capture with the queen or the pawn. And either way, I was going to get this nice diagonal for my bishop. They had weakened their dark squares by pushing b3, and I thought I'd be able to play down the c file quickly, get on this diagonal quickly, and cause a lot of problems. If I take the e-pawn, I thought I get the pawn, but I didn't see a clear way to cause immediate problems after that. Taking the pawn objectively is better. If I have this position again, that's likely what I would do. Because, unfortunately for me, I overestimated my attacking chances in this resulting position. So they offered the queen trade. Here again, I can play bishop to c5, which is pretty strong in this position, just developing with tempo. But I thought I had something in this position. So I overestimated this, and I was imagining bishop d7, getting on this diagonal, attacking down the c file, looks great. But I passed up two other positions that were also good for black. So I don't have any problems here, but it is a bit symmetrical, right? I don't have any clear pawn breaks anymore without c5, except for f6 if I ever want to play that. There's only one file to fight over with the c file. So if I'm not careful, this position is going to become very stale, very even, very quickly. So I want to try and keep that initiative up. So I'll go ahead and take the c file, play the check, and in this position there wasn't quite enough for me to get into c3 or get into c2. My opponent just calmly moved their king, and now I'm thinking, all right, I'm not even sure black's better anymore. I can't really be worse since I control the c file, but I wasn't impressed with this resulting position. So they kick my bishop back, and my opponent gets ready to develop their knight, and I already knew they wanted to play knight to b3 and into one of these squares. Because if there's one thing I've noticed about this opponent from our previous encounter and games I've just seen them playing in tournaments, is they love knight outposts. They're really skilled at rerouting their knights to get to good squares, and it seems like that's something they just go for very often. It's a high priority for them. And so I wanted to stop that. So I play bishop to a4, controlling this diagonal here and stopping their knight from developing. I thought I had a nice hold on this position. Maybe a5 at some point if I need a pawn break, but I'm going to just try and play slow. Not slow time-wise, but my moves don't need to be in a hurry. As long as I'm making moves that don't make my position worse, I should be playing for 2 results, was my thought. My opponent played g4, which was not a move I expected, expanding on the king side right away. and it wasn't particularly a good move either. Knight to g6, and I'm attacking all these dark squares. They can capture right away with their bishop, but would be happy to have the bishop pair in that position. My opponent plays rook to c1, and here I castled. I considered the best move, but I didn't play it. The best move being knight to f4 check, and just taking their bishop. So after knight f4 check, the king moves. Then, let's see, I would play knight f4 check. They would move their king. Then I would exchange rooks. And in this position, I was looking at this, and I wasn't sure if I needed to worry about this rook move. But it says I don't. And I guess the reason is they don't have time to take my rook and my knight. So if they take my rook, I get the bishop, and I've got 2 bishops for their rook. But it looked a little bit messy. The computer says, no, you're completely winning. That rook's going to get trapped. Yeah, I'm not sure the rook's going to be able to escape very easily, but it looked a little bit messy. So instead, I went ahead and just castled. I castled, and my opponent captured my knight, of course, so that they don't fall for this knight to f4 check when they don't have any counterplay. And here I thought for a little bit, trying to decide if I should take with the h-pawn or the f-pawn, or whether it mattered at all. And I decided to take with the h-pawn. I didn't want to give myself an additional weakness on e6, but I think that taking with the f-pawn would have been stronger. So in this position, I don't have the additional weakness, but I don't have any ability to play down the f-file. And it's a little bit easier for the h-file to open up. If I take with the f-pawn, I do have this weakness which they can't really target, but I also have the possibility of using my rook on the f-file, and maybe using the f4 square. The h-file is going to stay closed. It's easier for my king to get into the game. So probably, if I'm going to be playing for the win, taking with the f-pawn is stronger. Gives me more chances. Objectively, I'm not sure how much it matters. The computer likes taking with the f-pawn better. It says that black does have an advantage here. Not a winning advantage, but definitely if anyone has the advantage, it's black. So I take with the h-pawn. White plays f4. And I play a6. Just in case my bishop needs to back up, or in case I want to play b5 at some point. My opponent plays h4. And now I started getting a bit worried, because that pawn is going to be showing up on h5 if I'm not careful. So let's say I play a nonsense move. I was imagining some position like this with their rooks doubling up. And this looked very dangerous for me. I thought I might have to run my king, and white has all the play in this position. My bishops are on the a-file, stuck on the queen side, not coming back to help anytime soon. So looked way too dangerous. So I went ahead and played bishop to c2. I think even better was to play this idea now, bishop to c2. Try and get it to e4 maybe, but a6 didn't end up being very useful. So bishop c2, rook c6. The idea being that I was going to go ahead and double on the c-file, and with my bishop on c2, if there was ever an exchange, my bishop's going to be able to guard the h7 square or sit on f5. So they went ahead and played rook to c3, just trying to get the rooks off the board. And if I don't want the rooks to trade, then they're going to capture my bishop. So for example, rook to c8, and they simply take my bishop. And now I'm down a piece because this rook is defended twice. So I can trade by capturing on c3 or backing my bishop up. Don't think it makes a difference since white is going to be making that trade. And they eventually do get their knight to b3. But they move their king here instead, which I was a little surprised they didn't just jump their knight in. I'm not sure how much of a threat the knight creates when it's on that square, but that has been one of white's main plans. And what I was going to do is try and back my bishop up and maybe play b6. I thought there were possibilities of the bishop being on d8, playing b6, allowing white to capture on a6, and then trying to trap the knight. Not sure it works, but that was one of my ideas in the position. I play my bishop back to d8 with tempo because the h-pawn is undefended, and now I get to keep their knight out. So all this time we've only had one open file, and black has been in most of the control of that file, but without another rook on the board, it's hard for me to increase control over the c file. So I decided that I might as well trade those rooks off. We reached this position where I have the bishop pair. White's king is slightly more active. The pawn structure is very static. It's very locked. It's very closed. And so my bishops don't have a big advantage here. And it's very hard for me to create any kind of pawn breaks. f6 looks very weakening if he exchanges or if he does nothing. Right? If he just sits there and I capture, I'm only weakening my own pawn structure. Maybe a5 at some point is possible. But I'm playing for two results. And in this position, my opponent played bishop to c3 and offered a draw. And there's just no reason to accept the draw here because I think I can play on with no risk. I wasn't scared of losing this position. I wasn't sure I was going to win it. I thought maybe white would be able to hold the draw, but no chance of losing. So I go ahead and get back to a4, keep their knight out. And my bishop is just very dominant, covering lots of squares. Still don't have a plan to win the game. Right now I'm just preventing them from playing h5. But I don't need a plan to win the game. I just need to keep making moves that don't lose the game. And eventually something might happen. So I start to bring my king over. And right now my plan is to try and get my king to the b5 square. If I can get onto their side of the board with my king, either c4 or a4, the position should be winning. So that's where we're going. My opponent starts to go after my bishop that's controlling a lot of squares. And I play the move bishop to a4. And bishop to a4 is probably the move that loses my advantage. I think in this position, I'm probably winning with my plan of running to the b5 square. But after playing bishop a4 voluntarily, I now have lost the a4 square for my king and a move in which my king could have been closer. So what I should have done is played king to d7 and allowed them to attack my bishop and then moved it. So this time the prophylactic move was really just a waste of tempo. Their king didn't have to spend this tempo. And in this position, yeah, it's saying that black has basically a 1-point advantage. So maybe still not winning, but after bishop to a4, less than half a pawn. So wasn't sure how to get my king in now. I play a couple of checks, move my king in closer. And the issue is that anytime I move my king into b5, they play knight to b1. And what I missed way long ago when I started to go for this plan was that after knight to b1, of course the threat is knight to c3. But my bishop actually doesn't have any good squares. And so if I go to d1, which was originally my thought, they actually have a fork on c3. And so after knight to b1, I don't have a good square for my king or my bishop. I've got to play my bishop to b3, and then they play knight to c3 anyway. They defend the light squares, and I'm kind of stuck. So I got to this position and decided I had to play a5. I had to create an additional imbalance here, try and open up another file or another diagonal, get this bishop in, create some more room for my king. And my opponent just played very solid. And right now my king still can't get in. And they get in the move a4. And I think objectively this position should be a draw, because my king now cannot get onto white's side of the board. It was still worth playing on, I thought, because again, not really any way I lose this. Their bishop and knight really can't go after any of my pawns very effectively. So their knight went back. I did think that trading here could be losing. Something like bishop takes, king takes, Only way to make progress. And in this position, I can't guard my pawn. And so now, white's winning. So that was kind of one fear with trading off the bishop for the knight. I really wasn't gaining anything. The only way for my king to advance would be to also trade this bishop. And it seems like if all the pieces come off the board, then the only one that can win is white. So I just kept the bishop on the board, and my opponent played king to b3, which is a losing move. So take a moment here. You can pause the video if you want. How does black win this position? What is the tactic? Okay, and the move we're looking for is bishop to d1 check. My other bishop covers the dark squares, and their king cannot guard the a-pawn. And so now, it's not really about the fact that I got the a-pawn. Yes, that's useful. I have an extra pawn. They have to stop it. But more importantly, now my king has a path onto their side of the board. And all of the rest of their pawns are going to fall pretty easily. So we'll scroll through here. Right, these moves aren't super important. Just keeping my extra pawn safe. And then I get my king in. And then this is a nice little tactic here. They attack my bishop, and I ignore it by hitting their king with a check. And I'm happy to trade those bishops since it comes with the d-pawn as well. And we reach this position. I don't have notation after this. I think my opponent was getting low on time at this point, and the position was won. So eventually I'm able to queen a pawn and checkmate them. I think I end up queening the d-pawn. But this position, pretty easy to convert. White has to take the a-pawn, and the knight can't help create any passed pawns for white. There's just no way. They can take the f-pawn, the f7 pawn, but then it's very hard for them to take any other pawns. It's very easy for me to defend my pawns since they're on light squares with the bishop, or my king on f5, so not enough counterplay. Very interesting game. I was happy with the opening, but I did something that I've done a lot recently, which is I didn't play the objectively best or most forcing line to get an advantage in the opening, because I was either trying to keep pieces on the board or had some other plan. And in a game against a higher rated player, I would have just taken that e5 pawn or played bishop c5. And we're going to see this in some other games that I've played recently, where I'm not making the best opening decisions because I'm trying to kind of keep things on the board. And I think that's something I need to change. If my opponent's going to give me an edge, even with some pieces coming off the board, I need to go ahead and take that edge in the opening, just play disciplined chess, so I don't have to win these equal positions. Because what I'm doing is I'm putting myself in positions where it's equal, or maybe I'm even a little bit worse, and then I'm outplaying my opponent after that. But that might just be unnecessary. So I need to be a little more precise in my first 10 moves or so, I think. So that's something I'm going to be working on, to try and be more precise at the beginning, make sure I'm getting the objectively best position I can, and then playing from there. But my opponent played well, and I'm looking forward to our next battle. I'm sure we're going to get paired in a future tournament. Hopefully they gain some rating before then, since they really should not be 400 points below me. But that was round 1. Round 2 will be recapped soon. It was another exciting game. And good luck in your games, in your studies. And I'll see you guys for round 2 of the Evangel Open next time.